Good evening. Your heart may be heavy tonight, perhaps carrying a wound that hasn't healed, perhaps holding grief that won't release, perhaps wondering if you'll ever feel whole again. Tonight, we explore healing and recovery, the ancient Buddhist wisdom of rebirth after loss, the soul's remarkable capacity to mend itself and become even stronger in the broken places. Let your breath become soft and easy. Notice the gentle rise and fall of your chest. Let each exhale carry away whatever weight you've been holding. Tonight, there is nowhere else you need to be. No problem that needs solving right now. Just these stories, your breath, and this gentle unfolding of wisdom. Through 20 stories from monasteries and villages, from mountains and riversides, we'll discover how healing happens, not by forgetting our wounds, but by tending them with compassion. How recovery doesn't mean returning to who we were before, but becoming someone new, someone wiser, someone whose very scars have become sources of strength. If you're here carrying something broken, a heart that aches, or a spirit that's worn thin, you're not alone. These teachings have held millions through similar nights. For over 2 millennia, these insights have guided seekers through darkness into light, through suffering into peace, through endings into new beginnings. Let yourself be held by the darkness. Let yourself be cradled by the quietness. You are safe here. Rest now as we begin. The potter's broken bowl. In a small village at the edge of a great forest, there lived a potter named Kenji, whose hands could shape clay into vessels of extraordinary beauty. His bowls were known throughout the region, prized not only for their perfect symmetry, but for something harder to name, a quality of presence, as if each piece held its breath waiting to serve. Kenji had learned his craft from his grandfather, spending hours as a child watching the old man's weathered hands guide wet clay on the wheel. His grandfather taught him that pottery was not about force, but about listening, feeling the clay's willingness to take shape, respecting its nature while gently coaxing it toward form. For 30 years, Kenji created beautiful work. His shelves held hundreds of pieces, each one a small triumph of patience and skill. But there was one bowl, his masterwork, that he never sold. It was larger than the others, the color of autumn leaves after rain, with a glaze that seemed to hold light the way water holds the sky's reflection. He had spent a full year perfecting it, and when it finally emerged from the kiln, he knew he would never make anything more beautiful. The bowl sat on a special shelf in his workshop, and each morning before beginning his day's work, Kenji would hold it, feeling its weight, running his fingers along its flawless rim. It reminded him why he had chosen this difficult path, why he rose before dawn to work with mud and fire. One winter morning, a young apprentice, carrying wood for the kiln, stumbled. The stack of logs tumbled forward, striking the shelf. Kenji heard the crash and turned just in time to see his masterwork bowl falling through space, shattering into a dozen pieces on the stone floor. The sound seemed to echo forever. The apprentice stood frozen, his face pale with horror. Kenji knelt among the fragments, picking up pieces one by one. His hands trembled. 30 years of skill, 1 year of devoted labor, a lifetime's best work, reduced to broken clay. For days afterward, Kenji couldn't work. He would come to his workshop and sit among his wheels and tools, but his hands felt useless, heavy as stones. The joy had gone out of everything. What was the point of creating beauty if it could be destroyed in an instant? What was the purpose of care and devotion if accident could undo everything? His wife watched him grow quiet and distant. The apprentice, consumed with guilt, stayed away. Regular customers came and found the workshop closed. The village talked in concerned whispers about the potter who had lost his spirit along with his finest bowl. One evening, an elderly monk from the mountain monastery came down to buy rice bowls for the temple. Finding the workshop dark, he knocked on Kenji's house door. Kenji's wife explained what had happened, how her husband had been unable to work since his bowl was broken. The monk asked to see Kenji. He found the potter sitting in his workshop in the gathering dark, the fragments of the bowl still scattered on the table before him. The monk sat down without speaking. After a long silence, he picked up one of the larger pieces and held it to the window's fading light. He said nothing, just turned the fragment slowly, examining it from different angles. Finally, Kenji asked, "Can you fix what is broken?" The monk smiled gently. "Fix it? No. But perhaps we can heal it into something new." He explained a practice called kintsugi, the art of repairing broken pottery with lacquer mixed with gold dust. The cracks, rather than being hidden, would be highlighted, made beautiful, transformed into the most striking feature of the piece. The bowl would never be the same as before, but it might become something even more precious. Its history of breaking visible, honored, made golden. Over the following weeks, Kenji learned kintsugi from the monk. He cleaned each fragment carefully, fitted the pieces back together with utmost patience, and then, using lacquer mixed with actual gold powder, sealed the cracks. The work required steadiness and acceptance, a willingness to let the bowl's new identity emerge rather than trying to restore its old perfection. When it was finished, the bowl was not what it had been. The golden seams ran through it like lightning, like rivers on a map, like the paths that pain carves through a human life. It was no longer seamless and perfect. It was something better. It was honest. It was whole in a different way. Its brokenness had become its most beautiful feature. Kenji placed it back on the shelf and looked at it for a long time. Then he returned to his wheel and began to work again. But his pottery was different now. He no longer sought perfection. He made pieces that were intentionally asymmetrical, glazes that crackled and showed their age, bowls that celebrated their own natural flaws. His work became more sought after than ever, because now it carried something his earlier perfection had lacked, the wisdom of having been broken. Years later, people would travel from distant provinces to see the golden-veined bowl. They would stand before it in silence, and Kenji would watch their faces change as they understood. This bowl had been destroyed. This bowl had been made whole again. This bowl was more beautiful because it had broken. This story reminds us that healing doesn't mean erasing what happened. It means integrating our broken places into the wholeness of who we are becoming. When we experience loss, when something precious shatters, our first instinct is to wish it had never happened, to try to return to the way things were before. But healing rarely works that way. Think about your own life. Perhaps you've experienced a relationship ending, and you spent months trying to pretend you were the same person you were before that love entered and then left your life. Perhaps you've suffered illness or injury, and you've exhausted yourself trying to get back to your former strength, your previous capabilities. Perhaps you've lost someone you loved, and you've tried to fill the emptiness as if it was something to be ashamed of rather than honored. The kintsugi bowl teaches us differently. It says, yes, you were broken. Yes, something ended. Yes, you will never be exactly as you were. And that is not failure. That is transformation. The cracks in your heart, the scars on your spirit, the places where you had to be put back together, these are not flaws to hide. They are the golden seams that make you more beautiful, more real, more honestly human. In our modern world, we're taught to hide our scars, to present a perfect surface to the world. On social media, we share only our triumphs, our unbroken moments. When someone asks how we are, we say fine, even when we're shattered inside. We treat our pain as something to be concealed, our healing process as something private and vaguely shameful. But the kintsugi bowl is displayed proudly. Its repairs are not hidden but highlighted, made golden, celebrated. What if we approached our own healing this way? What if the very experiences that broke us became the most beautiful things about us? The sources of our deepest wisdom and most authentic compassion. Your broken places are where the light gets in, and they're also where light gets out. They're where you learned what really matters, where you discovered your own strength, where you became capable of understanding others' suffering because you've inhabited your own. The person you're becoming, with all your visible repairs, with all your golden seams, is more precious than the perfect person you used to be. Just this broken and mended self, this scarred and stronger heart, just this, made beautiful by its very willingness to break, to heal, to be transformed by fire and gold into something honestly whole. Your breath continues, steady and calm. Let your body sink a little deeper into rest. Notice how even your breathing has changed since we began. Softer now, easier. You are held by these words, cradled by this understanding. Rest as we turn to the next story. The monk and the starving tigress. High in the Himalayan mountains, where the air grows thin and the world seems closer to heaven, there lived a young monk named Padma, whose compassion was as vast as the sky. He had left his wealthy family to pursue enlightenment, trading silk robes for simple cotton, rich food for plain rice, the comforts of his father's house for a small cave where wind whistled through cracks in the stone. Padma practiced meditation for hours each day, sitting so still that birds would land on his shoulders, thinking him a statue. He studied ancient texts by firelight, memorizing sutras, contemplating the nature of suffering and the path to its cessation. But what marked him most was his deep, aching tenderness toward all living beings. He would walk carefully to avoid crushing insects. He would share his meager food with mice. He wept when he heard of suffering anywhere in the world. One spring morning, Padma was returning to his cave after collecting herbs for medicine when he heard a sound that stopped him in his tracks. A low, desperate moan, barely audible, coming from a hollow beneath a fallen tree. He approached carefully and found a tigress lying on her side, her body skeletal, her ribs showing sharply through dull fur. She had recently given birth, and 3 tiny cubs mewed beside her, trying to nurse from a mother too starved to produce milk. Padma knelt at a safe distance. The tigress lifted her head slightly, looking at him with eyes that held no threat, only exhaustion and resignation. She was dying, and her cubs would die with her. The harsh winter had depleted the game animals. She hadn't eaten in many days. She was too weak now to hunt, even if prey appeared. The monk's heart broke, Here was suffering, immediate and undeniable. Here were 4 lives flickering like candles in wind. He thought about the Buddhist teachings he had studied. All life is precious. All beings desire happiness and fear suffering. All beings are connected in the vast web of existence. The tigress was his mother. The cubs were his children. There was no separation between their suffering and his own. Padma set down his herb basket and sat in meditation. He contemplated what would happen if he did nothing. The tigress would die within hours. The cubs would die shortly after. Their bodies would feed other creatures. Yes, that was nature's way. But right now, in this moment, he had the power to end this particular suffering. He had that power in the only way available to him, through his own body. The teaching says that the body is merely a temporary vessel, a raft we use to cross the river of samsara toward enlightenment. The teaching says that clinging to self is the root of suffering. The teaching says that the highest practice is to give everything, even one's life, for the benefit of others. Padma had recited these words thousands of times. Now they asked to become more than words. He opened his eyes and looked at the tigress again. She had closed her eyes, her breathing shallow and irregular. The cubs were silent now, too weak even to cry. Time was running out. Padma stood slowly. His whole body trembled, not with fear but with the immensity of what he was about to do. He walked to the tigress and knelt beside her. He spoke softly, telling her he meant no harm, that he offered himself freely, that she should not hesitate to feed herself and her children. Then he leaned forward, exposing his throat. The tigress opened her eyes. For a moment, she and the monk looked at each other. Some say that in that moment, the tigress understood. Some say she saw the Buddha nature shining in Padma's eyes, recognized the profound sacrifice being offered, and felt something beyond animal hunger, something like gratitude or reverence or sorrow. But hunger is a powerful force, especially in a mother desperate to save her young. The tigress had strength for only one action. She took it. Padma's fellow monks found him 3 days later, drawn to the spot by a vision one of the elder teachers had during meditation. They found his bones beneath the tree, his robes torn and scattered. The tigress and her cubs were gone, having survived because of his gift. The monks collected Padma's remains with tears streaming down their faces. They built a stupa on that spot, marking the place where their brother had practiced the ultimate compassion. Years later, it's said that a large tiger would sometimes come to that stupa and sit before it for hours, perfectly still, as if in meditation. People believed it was one of the cubs, now grown, coming to honor the monk who had given everything so she might live. Some said they saw tears in the tiger's eyes. Some said that on certain nights, the stupa glowed with golden light, and you could hear the sound of someone chanting sutras, the voice carrying across the mountains like a blessing. This teaching shows us the nature of true healing, not just of our own wounds, but of the world's suffering. Padma's story is not about dying. It's about recognizing that we are not separate from those who suffer. It's about the healing that happens when we stop seeing ourselves as isolated individuals and start experiencing our deep connection to all life. Now, you're not being asked to give your life to a tiger. That would be misunderstanding the teaching. But notice what happens when you stop seeing another person's suffering as separate from your own. When your partner is in pain and you truly feel that pain as if it were happening in your own body. When your child is struggling, and you would take that struggle upon yourself if you could. When you see a stranger suffering and something in your chest tightens, your own eyes grow damp, because their pain has become real to you. This is the beginning of healing, not just for them, but for yourself. Because the root of so much of our own suffering is this terrible sense of isolation, this feeling that we're alone in the universe, separate from everyone else, fundamentally on our own. When we break down that wall, when we let ourselves feel our connection to other beings, even when that connection hurts, we are healing something deep in ourselves. Perhaps you're recovering from betrayal, and you've built walls around your heart. You've decided to protect yourself by staying separate, by never being vulnerable again. This story whispers, the walls that keep out pain also keep out life. The healing doesn't come from isolation, but from remembering your connection to others, even those who hurt you. Perhaps especially those who hurt you, because they too are suffering. They too are struggling. They too are trying to survive in a difficult world. Perhaps you're healing from loss, and you've tried to not care so much, to detach, to protect yourself from future grief by loving less. This story says, the healing is not in loving less, but in understanding that love and loss are inseparable, that the capacity to grieve is the measure of the capacity to love, that your broken heart is evidence of your beautiful humanity. In our modern lives, we seek healing through separation. We leave painful relationships. We distance ourselves from difficult people. We try to eliminate sources of suffering from our lives. Sometimes this is necessary and healthy. But Padma's story reminds us that true healing, complete healing, involves the opposite movement. It involves opening, softening, recognizing our profound connection to all beings, including those who cause us pain. This doesn't mean staying in abusive situations. This doesn't mean accepting harm. It means carrying a heart that remains tender even when it's been broken. It means continuing to care even when caring hurts. It means understanding that your suffering and the suffering of the person who hurt you are not two separate things but part of the same vast web of human struggle. The ultimate healing is not the healing of your individual wounds. It's the healing of the illusion of separation itself. When you understand that there is no your pain and my pain, but just pain, just suffering, just the human condition flowing through billions of lives, then something fundamental shifts. You are healed not by transcending suffering, but by recognizing that you've never been alone in it. Just this open heart, this willingness to feel, this courage to remain connected even when connection brings pain. Just this is the healing. Just this is the path. Just this is what makes us most fully human and most fully alive. Let your shoulders soften. Let your jaw release any tension. Feel yourself settling deeper, breathing easier. The next story is waiting to hold you. The Broken Bridge. In ancient China, near the city of Hangzhou, there was a famous bridge called Broken Bridge, though it was not broken at all. It got its name because, in winter, when snow covered everything, the arch of the bridge would cause the snow to melt first on the sunny side, making it appear broken from a distance. Locals considered it one of the most beautiful spots in all of Westlake, especially on snowy days when the optical illusion was most striking. An old woman named May lived in a small house overlooking this bridge. She had lived there for 60 years, since she was a young bride. Her husband had brought her to this house after their wedding, and they had raised 3 children here. Watching them grow up and eventually move away to other cities. Her husband had died 10 years ago, leaving her alone in the house full of memories. May's daily routine involved walking across Broken Bridge to the market each morning. She knew every stone of that bridge, every irregularity in its ancient surface. She could walk it in complete darkness if needed. The bridge was more than a structure to her. It was a companion, a constant in a life where everything else had changed. One summer, heavy rains caused flooding throughout the region. The lake swelled beyond its banks, and the water's fury undermined the foundations of many structures. When the floods finally receded, officials inspected the damage. Broken Bridge, which had stood for 500 years, was declared unsafe. The foundation had been compromised. It needed to be demolished and rebuilt. May watched as workers came and began taking the bridge apart, stone by stone. Each stone removed felt like a piece of her life being erased. She had kissed her husband goodbye on that bridge every morning when he left for work. Her children had learned to walk across it, their small hands clutching her fingers. She had scattered her husband's ashes from its center, releasing them into the water he had loved. Now it was being destroyed. She fell into a deep depression. She stopped going to market, afraid to see the empty space where the bridge had been. She stopped eating properly. Her children called, concerned, but she couldn't explain the depth of her grief. It was just a bridge, they said. A new one would be built. It would look almost the same, but it wouldn't be the same. Nothing would ever be the same again. A young engineer named Wei was overseeing the reconstruction. He noticed the old woman watching sadly from her window. His grandmother had been like this too, clinging to the past, devastated by change. He felt compassion for May, but he also knew the bridge had been dangerous. Sentiment could not outweigh safety. One day, Wei knocked on May's door. He carried something wrapped in cloth. May answered, her eyes red from crying. "I've brought you something," Wei said. He unwrapped the cloth to reveal a stone from the original bridge. "I noticed you watching. I thought you might want to keep one of the stones. Many of them are being used in the new foundation, but this one I set aside for you." May took the stone in her hands. It was heavy, ancient, worn smooth by 5 centuries of footsteps. She could see the mark where mortar had once attached it to its neighbors. She held it to her chest and began to weep. Wei sat with her while she cried. When her tears finally slowed, he spoke gently. "The bridge is not gone. Its essence remains. These stones have been part of this lake for 500 years. Now they will be part of it for 500 more. Different configuration, same spirit. The bridge is transforming, not dying." May looked at him. "But my memories." "Your memories are not in the stones," Wei said. "They're in you. The bridge was a witness to your life, but it was never the container of your life. That new bridge will carry new people across the water, creating new memories. Your old bridge will continue its service in a new form. Isn't that what everything does? Isn't that what we all must do?" Over the following months, May watched the new bridge take shape. Some of the original stones were incorporated into its foundation. Her stone, the one Wei had given her, sat on her windowsill where she could hold it whenever she felt sad. Slowly, she began to understand what Wei had meant. The bridge had not been destroyed. It had been transformed. Its materials continued serving the same purpose in a new configuration. Just like her life had been transformed by her husband's death, by her children leaving, by age changing her body, she was not the same May who had first crossed that bridge as a young bride. But she was still May. The essence remained even as the form changed. On the day the new bridge opened, May walked across it slowly, one hand trailing along the new railing. It felt different under her feet, smoother, stronger. But when she reached the center and looked out across the water, the view was the same. The lake was still the lake. The mountains beyond were unchanged. The bridge was simply doing what bridges do, connecting one shore to another, making passage possible, serving. She understood then that healing from loss doesn't mean forgetting. It means carrying what was precious forward into what comes next. The old bridge lived on in the new one. Her husband lived on in her. Her young self lived on in her old self. Nothing was truly lost. Everything transformed. This story teaches us that recovery from loss requires us to understand the nature of transformation. When something ends, when something breaks, when something must be rebuilt, we often experience this as total loss. We say, "It's gone. It's over. It will never be the same." And that's true in one sense. Nothing ever stays the same. Everything changes form. But the essence continues. The love you felt for someone who died doesn't die. It transforms. It becomes memory, then wisdom, then the particular tenderness you feel when you encounter others' grief. The relationship that ended doesn't vanish. It becomes the lessons you learned, the growth you experienced, the person you became through loving and being loved. Think about your own life's broken bridges. Perhaps it's a career that ended, and you felt your whole identity crumble. Perhaps it's a marriage that dissolved, and you thought you'd never be whole again. Perhaps it's health you lost, capabilities you once had, the person you used to be who seems gone forever. This story whispers, you are not rebuilding the same bridge. You're building a new one. And that's not failure. That's life. The stones of who you were are being incorporated into who you're becoming. Nothing is wasted. Everything serves. Your former self becomes the foundation of your future self. In our culture, we often speak of getting back to normal after crisis or loss. We treat healing as return, recovery as restoration. But May learned what the Buddha taught. There is no going back. There is only going forward, carrying what was precious into what comes next, letting form change while essence continues. When you resist transformation, when you keep trying to rebuild exactly what was lost, you exhaust yourself fighting the nature of reality itself. Everything changes. Everything transforms. The bridge that stood for 500 years eventually needed rebuilding. That's not tragedy. That's just time doing what time does. The healing comes when you stop trying to resurrect the past and start honoring how it lives on in the present. You don't replace what was lost. You incorporate it into what's being built. Your grief becomes part of your foundation. Your scars become part of your strength. Your losses become part of your wisdom. Just this transformed self, this rebuilt bridge, this life that keeps flowing forward even when we wish we could stay on familiar shore. Just this is healing. Just this is how we honor what was by letting it become what will be. Feel your breath moving in and out, a rhythm as ancient as life itself. Let your whole body grow heavy with rest. Another story waits in the darkness, ready to teach you. The farmer who lost everything. There was a farmer named Hiroshi who lived in a small village at the base of a mountain in southern Japan. He was neither rich nor poor, neither particularly happy nor particularly sad. He worked his rice paddies as his father had, and his grandfather before him, tending the land with the steady devotion of someone who understands that farming is not something you do but something you are. Hiroshi had a wife, Yuki, who made the best pickled vegetables in 3 provinces. He had a son, Ichiro, who was learning to manage the paddies and would one day take over the farm. He had a small but sturdy house, a barn with 3 cows, chickens that laid enough eggs to trade for other necessities, and respect in his community as a man of his word. Life was not easy, but it was good. Hiroshi would wake before dawn, check his paddies, tend his animals, eat Yuki's cooking, joke with his son, and fall asleep content. This was enough. This was everything he needed. Then, in the space of 1 terrible season, everything was taken from him. First came the flood. The river swelled beyond anything anyone had ever seen, breaking its banks and sweeping through the valley. Hiroshi's rice paddies, ready for harvest, were destroyed in a single night. The water carried away not just the crop but the topsoil itself, leaving behind rocky, barren ground. His barn collapsed. 2 of his cows drowned. The foundation of his house cracked, making it unsafe to inhabit. Before he could recover from the flood, disease struck. Some sickness from the contaminated water, the doctors said. Yuki fell ill first, then Ichiro. Hiroshi nursed them desperately, but the medicine was expensive and largely ineffective. Within 3 weeks, both were dead. He buried them on the small hill behind what had been their house, in graves he dug with his own hands, his body shaking with grief and exhaustion. The village helped him somewhat, bringing food, offering shelter. But everyone had suffered losses in the flood. They had little to spare. Hiroshi sold his remaining cow and his damaged land for almost nothing, paid his debts, and found himself, at 52 years old, with nothing but the clothes he wore and the rice he could carry in a small sack. He left his village because he couldn't bear to stay. Everywhere he looked, he saw his former life mocking him. He walked north, not knowing where he was going, not caring. He felt hollow, emptied out, as if his soul had been extracted, leaving only a shell that continued moving out of habit. For months he wandered, taking odd jobs when he could find them, sleeping in barns or beneath bridges, speaking to no one. He had lost everything. His family, his land, his identity, his reason for existing. He was alive, but he couldn't remember why he bothered to stay that way. One autumn evening, as the sun was setting, Hiroshi found himself on a mountain path, climbing without purpose. He was tired, so tired. He thought vaguely that it would be easy to simply stop, to lie down and not get up again. Winter was coming. The cold would be painless. They said, sleep and then nothing. Nothing sounded beautiful to him, better than this endless grey grief. He sat on a rock as the light faded, looking out over the valley below. In the distance, he could see terraced rice fields, small villages, smoke rising from evening fires. Somewhere down there, people were eating dinner together, Parents were putting children to bed. Couples were talking about tomorrow's plans. Life continuing. Life that he was no longer part of. A voice spoke beside him. Beautiful evening. Hiroshi turned to find an old man sitting on a nearby rock. He hadn't heard anyone approach. The man was ancient, his face 1,000 wrinkles, but his eyes were clear and kind. He carried a walking stick and wore the simple robes of a wandering monk. "I suppose," Hiroshi said dully. The monk settled himself more comfortably, as if he planned to stay a while. "I've walked this path many times over the years. The view never gets old." They sat in silence as stars began emerging. Finally, Hiroshi said, "I've lost everything." The monk nodded. "Yes, I can see that in your face. Then you know there's nothing left. Nothing worth staying for." The monk considered this. "What did you lose?" Hiroshi told him. "The flood, his land, his wife, his son. Everything he had built over 50 years, gone in a single season. I am nothing now. Worse than nothing. An empty man." The monk listened carefully. When Hiroshi finished, he said, "I too lost everything once. Wife, children, home, all of it. War took them. I was devastated, like you. I saw no reason to continue." "What changed?" Hiroshi asked. "I realized I was looking at it backwards." "What do you mean?" The monk picked up a small stone and held it out to Hiroshi. "What do you see?" "A stone." "Describe it." Hiroshi looked more carefully. "Grey. Rough. Ordinary." The monk turned it in the fading light. "I see a stone that was once part of the mountain. The mountain that will be here long after we're gone. This stone was formed millions of years ago, shaped by ice and wind and water. It has traveled far from where it began. It has changed form countless times. And when this stone eventually becomes sand, then earth, then perhaps part of a new mountain, it will still exist, just in a different form. I don't understand. You think you've lost everything because the form your life took is gone. Wife, son, land. These were the shapes your love took. But love itself cannot be lost. It transforms. Your wife and son are gone, but the love remains in you. Not as memory, as presence, as the capacity to love again, as tenderness toward others who suffer, as wisdom to share with those still fighting their own floods." Hiroshi felt tears on his face. "But they're gone. The form is gone. The essence remains. You are not empty. You are full of everything you ever loved. It's just that love no longer has the shape you're accustomed to, so you can't recognize it." They sat together as full darkness fell. The monk eventually rose to leave. "The path continues both up and down from here. Up leads to the monastery where I live. Down leads back to the world. Either way, you'll be carrying everything you think you lost. You never lost it. It's all still here, in you, waiting to take new form." After the monk left, Hiroshi sat for a long time. He thought about the stone, about transformation, about how nothing is ever truly lost. He thought about his wife's laugh becoming his own capacity for joy, his son's curiosity becoming his own openness to learning, his farm becoming his understanding of patience and cycles and how life grows from apparent death. When he finally stood up, he turned and walked down the mountain, back toward the world. Not because his grief was gone, it would never be completely gone, but because he understood something new. He had not lost everything. He had lost everything's form. But form changes. That's what form does. The essence, the love, the meaning of his life remained. It simply needed to discover what shape it would take next. Hiroshi eventually found his way to a small village where they needed someone to teach children about farming. He took the position. He never remarried, but he loved those children as if they were his own. He never owned land again, but he taught others how to care for it. His wife and son were gone, but they lived on through him, through what he gave to the world because of having loved them. He carried everything he had lost, not as burden, but as treasure. Not as past, but as presence. This story teaches us the deepest truth about healing from catastrophic loss. When everything is taken from you, when you feel you have nothing left, you are actually standing at the threshold of profound transformation. Not because the pain isn't real, it is achingly real, but because you're being forced to discover what cannot be taken. What remains when everything removable is removed? Hiroshi thought he was empty, but he was full of love that had nowhere to go, full of capacity that had lost its familiar outlet, full of wisdom earned through suffering. The healing began when he stopped trying to rebuild his old life and started discovering what new form his love could take. Perhaps you've experienced this. Perhaps illness took your former capabilities. Perhaps death took someone you built your whole life around. Perhaps circumstance destroyed the future you'd been planning. And you felt like Hiroshi, hollowed out, empty, pointless. This teaching whispers, you are not empty. You are full of everything you think you lost. Your loved one is gone, but the love remains, seeking new form. Your old life is over, but your capacity to live remains, ready to discover new expression. Your former identity is dissolved, but your essential self remains, waiting to understand what shape it will take next. In our modern grief, we often hear time heals all wounds, but that's not quite right. Time doesn't heal. Transformation heals. The willingness to let what was precious take new form heals. The courage to carry your loss forward into the life you haven't yet discovered heals. You are not recovering your old life. You are discovering your new one. You are not getting back to who you were. You are becoming who you now are, shaped by everything you've lost and everything you've learned from losing it. The healing is not restoration. It's transformation. Just this person shaped by loss, this heart broken open, this life that continues not despite the endings but because of them, strengthened by everything it survived. Just this is the healing. Just this is what remains when everything else is stripped away. Just this beautiful, terrible, resilient truth. You are still here, still capable of love, still able to give meaning to suffering by how you carry it forward. Feel the weight of your body, heavy and solid. Feel yourself sinking deeper into rest. Let go a little more with each breath. More stories wait in the warm darkness, ready to hold you through the night. The healer's own wound. In a monastery deep in the mountains of Tibet, there lived a monk physician named Tenzin who was renowned throughout the region for his healing abilities. People would climb for days to reach his clinic, bringing ailments of body and spirit, and most left feeling genuinely better, touched not just by his medicine but by his presence, which seemed to radiate peace. Tenzin had studied medicine since childhood. His father, also a doctor, had taught him how different herbs affected the body, how to read the pulse, how to recognize disease in a patient's eyes, breath, and bearing. But Tenzin's real gift wasn't his knowledge, though that was extensive. His gift was his complete attention. When you were with Tenzin, you felt you were the only person in the world who mattered to him in that moment. Other monks would ask how he maintained this quality of presence, especially when facing suffering day after day. Tenzin would smile and say it was simply what the practice required. To heal, you had to be fully present. Distraction was a kind of abandonment. He made it look easy. What no one knew was that Tenzin was in constant pain. Years before, while collecting medicinal herbs on a dangerous cliff face, Tenzin had fallen. He survived, but his left leg had been crushed. The bones healed incorrectly. Every step sent fire through his hip. Every moment of sitting caused his leg to stiffen painfully. Standing for long periods made his whole body shake with suppressed agony. But Tenzin had trained himself not to show it. He walked with only the slightest limp. He sat through long consultations without revealing his suffering. He stood at his medicine table for hours, grinding herbs, appearing calm and focused while waves of pain broke against his concentration. He told no one because he feared they would lose faith in his healing abilities. How could a healer who couldn't heal himself help others? He also felt ashamed, as if his pain represented some failure of his Buddhist practice. Shouldn't he be beyond physical suffering? Shouldn't his meditation have freed him from attachment to bodily comfort? So he bore his secret alone, using all his considerable skill to hide what he was experiencing. His smile never faltered. His attention never wavered from his patients. He functioned perfectly while suffering constantly, and this took a toll that even he didn't fully recognize. One winter morning, a young woman named Dolma arrived at the monastery. She had walked for 8 days to reach Tenzin, and she was dying. Anyone could see it. Cancer, spreading from somewhere inside, consuming her slowly. She was perhaps 30 years old, and she knew she had at most a few months remaining. Dolma told Tenzin she didn't come seeking cure. She understood that was impossible, but seeking help in learning to die well, in facing her own ending with some measure of peace. Could he teach her? Tenzin spoke with her for a long time. He gave her medicines to ease her pain. He taught her meditation techniques to calm her fear. But as the days passed and she stayed at the monastery to learn from him, Tenzin felt something shift. This young woman, facing death, seemed more at peace than he was. She spoke openly about her suffering, her fear, her sadness about the life she wouldn't live. She didn't hide anything. And somehow this honesty made her light, almost joyful, even as she weakened. One evening, they were sitting together in the herb garden, watching the sunset. Dolma said, "Teacher, may I ask you something personal? Of course, you are in pain, aren't you? All the time. I can see it in the way you move, the tiny catch in your breath when you think no one is watching." Tenzin felt his carefully maintained composure crack. "How did you know?" "I know pain intimately now. I recognize it in others. Will you tell me about yours?" And Tenzin found himself telling her everything. The fall, the constant agony, the shame of not being healed, the fear that his suffering made him a fraud, the exhaustion of pretending. It poured out of him, years of hidden pain finally given voice. Dolma listened with the same quality of attention Tenzin usually gave others. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Teacher, I think you've misunderstood something essential." "What do you mean?" "You think your pain makes you less able to heal others. But I think it's the source of your gift. When you sit with me, suffering from the inside, you're not observing pain from a comfortable distance. You're sitting with me in the fire. That's why your presence heals. Not because you've transcended suffering, but because you haven't abandoned it." Tenzin felt something shift deep in his chest. "But I should be beyond this." The Buddha taught. The Buddha taught about suffering and the end of suffering. But the end of suffering isn't the absence of pain. It's the end of running from pain, of pretending it isn't there, of making it mean something about our worth or our practice. You think hiding your pain shows strength, but I think it shows you're still at war with what is. They sat together as darkness fell. Tenzin realized that Dolma, dying, had just healed something in him that years of practice had not touched. She had seen his secret suffering and shown him it wasn't shameful. It was human. It was real. And it wasn't separate from his ability to help others. It was part of it. In the days that followed, Tenzin stopped hiding his pain. Not dramatically. He didn't announce it or make it central, but he stopped expending energy concealing it. He let himself limp. He shifted positions when he needed to. He sometimes admitted, "My old injury is especially painful today." What he discovered astonished him. His patients didn't lose faith. They trusted him more. They opened up more readily, shared their own hidden struggles, stopped pretending. The quality of healing deepened because the relationship became more real, more human. Doctor and patient were both suffering beings trying to help each other. The power dynamic shifted to something more like companionship. Dolma stayed at the monastery through the winter. She grew weaker but also somehow more luminous, as if approaching death had polished something in her soul to brightness. She taught Tenzin as much as he taught her. When she died in early spring, peaceful and surrounded by love, Tenzin grieved deeply. But he also felt gratitude. She had healed his relationship with his own suffering, had shown him that the wound and the gift are often the same thing. After her death, Tenzin created a new meditation practice. Each morning, before seeing patients, he would sit with his pain, not trying to overcome it or transcend it, but simply being with it, acknowledging it, honoring it as his teacher. This is what made him a healer, not his absence of suffering but his willingness to meet it fully. Years later, when other monks in training asked about becoming healers, Tenzin would tell them about Dolma. The deepest healing, he would say, comes not from those who've conquered suffering but from those who've learned to be honest about it. Your wound is not separate from your gift. Your wound is your gift, if you're willing to stop hiding it. This story reveals something essential about healing, both our own and that we offer others. We often think we need to be healed before we can help heal. We think our ongoing struggles, our unresolved issues, our persistent pain disqualifies us from being sources of healing for others. But this teaching shows us the opposite is true. Your wound is your gift. Not in some abstract sense, but concretely. What you've suffered has given you eyes to see others suffering. What you've struggled with has given you patience with others' struggles. Your persistent pain has taught you what the textbooks can't, what it actually feels like to hurt, to try, to fail, to try again. Think about the people in your life who've truly helped you. Were they the ones who seemed perfect, untouched by difficulty, speaking to you from some enlightened distance? Or were they the ones whose own struggles were visible, who sat with you in the mess of being human, who said, "I know what this feels like because I've been there too"? When we hide our pain, we create separation. We put ourselves on a pedestal or in a hole, anywhere but beside the other person in shared humanity. When we're honest about our struggle, we create connection. We say, "I'm still figuring this out too. Let's figure it out together." Perhaps you've been through depression and now someone you love is depressed. You think, "I should be able to help them. I've been through this." But then you find yourself still having bad days, still struggling, and you feel like a hypocrite. This story says, your ongoing struggle doesn't disqualify you. It qualifies you. You can sit with them in the darkness because you know that darkness from the inside. You can offer real hope because you're proof that it's possible to keep living even when it's hard. Perhaps you've survived trauma and someone comes to you with their own trauma story. You're triggered. You're reminded of your own pain that hasn't fully healed. You think, "I'm not the right person for this. I'm still broken myself." But this story whispers, your wound recognizes their wound. That recognition is healing, the assurance that they're not alone, that someone else understands, that the pain they're feeling is real and valid because you've felt it too. In our modern culture, we have this idea that helpers should be healed. Therapists should have their own lives perfectly together. Teachers should have mastered what they teach. Parents should have figured everything out before having children. But life doesn't work that way. We're all wounded healers. We're all learning while teaching. We're all broken people trying to help other broken people. The healing happens not despite our wounds but through them. When we stop hiding, when we stop pretending, when we let our struggles show, we give others permission to be honest about theirs. That honesty is where real healing begins, in the acknowledgement that suffering is part of being human, that we don't have to have it all figured out, that we can help each other even while we're still hurting. Just this wounded healer, this honest acknowledgement of pain, this willingness to be human with each other instead of performing invulnerability. Just this is what allows genuine healing to happen. Not the healing of becoming perfect, but the healing of becoming real. Notice how deeply you've settled now. Your body heavy with rest. Your breath slow and easy. Let yourself drift as the next story finds you. The Potter's Lotus. In a village by a slow-moving river, there lived a potter named Wei, who specialized in making lotus-shaped lamps. Each lamp was a small masterpiece, a ceramic lotus flower that held oil and a wick, its petals seeming to unfold in permanent bloom. When lit, the lamp would glow from within, casting shadows of lotus petals on nearby walls, transforming any room into a garden of light. Wei had learned this craft from her grandmother, who had learned it from her own mother, a lineage of lotus lamp makers stretching back generations. The technique was difficult, requiring perfect proportions and glazing. Most attempts resulted in lamps that were merely pretty. Wei's lamps were transcendent, each one unique, each one alive. She was proud of her work, and rightly so. Her lamps sold well, decorating temples and wealthy homes throughout the province. She had apprentices eager to learn, regular customers, financial security, and the respect of her community. Her hands knew exactly how to shape the clay, how to curl each petal, how to make the lotus emerge from muddy material into perfect form. But then, slowly, Wei began to lose her sight. It started with blurriness at the edges of her vision. Then colors became muted. Then details faded. Doctors examined her and found nothing they could treat. A degeneration of the eyes, they said. Age-related. Irreversible. Within a year, she would be completely blind. Wei was devastated. Her whole identity, her entire skill, her family's legacy, all depended on sight. How could she shape delicate petals if she couldn't see them? How could she mix glazes without seeing colors? How could she continue her craft in darkness? She tried to work faster, to create as many lamps as possible before her vision failed completely. But desperation made her clumsy. Her usually graceful hands fumbled. Pots collapsed on the wheel. Glazes came out wrong. Her apprentices watched nervously as their master fell apart. One evening, as Wei sat in her dark workshop, unable to face the wheel anymore, her oldest friend visited. Mei was a teacher of flower arrangement, and she brought a lotus flower fresh from the pond. "Feel this," Mei said, placing the lotus in Wei's hands. Wei ran her fingers over the flower's surface. The coolness of the petals, still damp. The texture of the stem, slightly fuzzy. The weight of the bud in her palm. The subtle curve where each petal emerged from the center. "This is what you've been making all these years," Mei said. "Not pictures of lotuses. Real lotuses, translated into clay. You know this shape in your hands, in your bones. Your eyes have only been confirming what your hands already knew." Wei held the lotus, turning it slowly in her fingers. Mei was right. Her hands had made hundreds of these lamps. Her fingers knew the feeling of rightness when the clay was shaped correctly. She had always thought she was working from sight, but maybe sight had only been one way of knowing, and not even the most important way. Over the following weeks, as her vision continued to dim, Wei began experimenting with working blind. At first, she kept her eyes closed, testing whether her hands remembered what her eyes could no longer reliably see. She made mistakes. Many pots collapsed. Many lamps came out misshapen. But slowly, gradually, her fingers began to remember. They had always known. She simply hadn't trusted them before. When Wei finally went completely blind, she didn't stop working. She worked differently, slower, more intentionally. She would sit at her wheel with real lotus flowers in a bowl of water beside her, so she could touch them frequently, reminding her fingers of the living form she was translating into clay. She learned to judge the clay's moisture by feel, the kiln's temperature by the heat on her face, the glaze's consistency by its weight on her fingers. Her new lamps were different from her old ones. They were less perfect in technical terms. Sometimes petals were uneven. Sometimes the glaze pooled in unexpected ways. But they had something her earlier work had lacked, a quality of authenticity, as if each lamp was no longer an image of a lotus, but a lotus itself, complete with all the small variations that make living things beautiful. People noticed. Her customers didn't fall away as she'd feared. Instead, they increased. Her new lamps were more sought after than her old ones. People said they had soul, that you could feel the potter's hands in them, that they were more than mere objects. They were presences. Wei's apprentices learned differently now too. Instead of watching her work, they felt her hands guiding theirs, learned through touch rather than sight. The teaching became more intimate, more direct, hand to hand rather than eye to eye. One evening, several years after losing her sight completely, Wei was being interviewed by a traveling scholar documenting traditional crafts. The scholar asked how she'd adapted to blindness, expecting a story of courageous perseverance through hardship. Wei laughed. "I didn't adapt to blindness," she said. "I discovered what sight had been hiding from me all along, that I was never making what I saw. I was making what I knew. Losing my eyes just forced me to trust my hands, to understand that the shape of beauty lives in me, not outside me. The lotus in my fingers is more real than the lotus in my eyes ever was." She picked up one of her lamps, running her fingers over it with obvious love. "When I could see, I was trying to make perfect lotuses, trying to match some ideal in my mind. Now I make real lotuses, each one different, each one flawed, each one alive. The darkness taught me to touch what I was making, and touching taught me to make what I was feeling, and feeling taught me that the true form of things is not what they look like, but what they are." The scholar asked if she missed seeing. Wei was quiet for a long moment. "Sometimes," she finally said, "but I've gained something too. I live more in my hands now, more in touch, more in the present moment, because each gesture has to be felt, not just observed. Blindness took sight, yes, but it gave me presence. I'll trade one for the other." As Wei grew older, her fame spread. People would travel great distances to buy a lamp made by the blind potter whose lotuses seemed to glow with inner life. They would watch her work, amazed at the certainty of her hands, the confidence of fingers moving over clay as if reading it, as if the pot was already there and she was simply revealing it through touch. When she died, many years later, her apprentices continued her methods, working with eyes closed or in darkened rooms, learning to trust hands over sight, to find beauty through feeling rather than looking. They said that Wei's greatest lesson wasn't about making pots. It was about understanding that loss can break you open to a different way of being, that what we think we can't live without might be hiding something we need to discover, that sometimes we have to lose one kind of sight to gain another. This story teaches us about the unexpected gifts that loss can bring. Not compensation for what was taken, not substitutes for what's gone, but entirely new capabilities that emerge only when we're forced to live differently. Wei didn't just adapt to blindness. She was transformed by it, became a different kind of artist, a different kind of teacher, a different kind of human being. Perhaps you've experienced loss that felt like it destroyed your whole identity. Maybe you were athletic, an injury ended your ability to play sports. Maybe you were a brilliant student, and illness made concentration impossible. Maybe you had a career you loved, and the economy eliminated your industry. And you thought, I can't be who I was. I don't know who I am now. This story whispers, you are being forced to discover parts of yourself that your old identity was hiding. The athlete becomes a coach who understands frustration from the inside. The student becomes a teacher who knows how to reach those who struggle. The professional becomes an entrepreneur who creates something new. Not because these are consolation prizes, but because loss breaks us open to possibilities we couldn't see when we were still whole in the old way. Think about what you've lost. Not to minimize the pain. That pain is real. But to ask, what has that loss forced you to develop? What muscles of spirit or skill or understanding have you had to grow because you couldn't rely on what you used to have? Wei lost sight and gained touch, presence, authenticity. What have you lost and what have you gained, even if you haven't recognized it yet as gain? In our modern culture, we treat disability as purely loss, aging as purely decline, any limitation as purely negative. But this story suggests something more complex, that what we lose can teach us, transform us, give us access to parts of ourselves that our former capabilities kept hidden. Not because loss is good, it isn't, but because we are more adaptable, more capable of transformation than we usually believe. The healing from loss isn't learning to live without what we lost. It's discovering who we become in the absence of it. Wei didn't learn to make pots despite being blind. She learned to make different pots, better pots in some ways, because she was blind. Her limitation became her liberation. What if your loss is like that? What if the very thing you think makes you less is teaching you to become more, just in an unexpected direction? What if the life you're being forced to live, the one you didn't choose, is showing you capacities you couldn't have developed in the life you planned? Just this transformed self, this person shaped by absence into unexpected presence, this life that lost one way of being only to discover another, perhaps truer way. Just this is the healing, not return to what was but arrival at what is, holding loss and gift in the same hands, letting both be true at once. Feel how completely you've surrendered to rest now. Your mind quiet, your body at peace. The stories continue in the gentle darkness, each one a small light guiding you toward sleep. The musician's silence. In the bustling city of Beijing, during the Ming dynasty, there lived a musician named Zhang Lin, whose mastery of the guqin, the ancient seven-stringed zither, was legendary. People said that when Zhang Lin played, even the birds would stop singing to listen. Even the wind would quiet itself. His music could make hardened soldiers weep and bring smiles to the faces of those consumed by grief. Zhang Lin had studied music since childhood, rising each morning before dawn to practice. His father had been a musician, and his grandfather before him, each passing down secrets of technique and interpretation. But Zhang Lin surpassed them all. He didn't just play music. He channeled something deeper, some current of emotion that flowed through the strings into the hearts of listeners. He performed in the imperial court, at festivals, in wealthy homes. His recordings on silk scrolls were treasured possessions. Young musicians traveled from distant provinces hoping to study with him. Zhang Lin's identity was completely wrapped up in his music. It wasn't what he did. It was who he was. Without music, he often thought, he would be nothing. Then, during a particularly cold winter, Zhang Lin developed pain in his hands. At first, he ignored it, pressing through. But the pain intensified, spreading from his fingers up his wrists to his arms. His hands began to stiffen. Simple tasks became difficult. Playing became agony. He consulted physicians, tried acupuncture, took herbs, prayed at temples. Nothing helped. The diagnosis was grim: a progressive condition that would eventually leave his hands completely rigid and useless. He might have a year, perhaps 2, before he could no longer play at all. And then what? Then he would be nothing. Zhang Lin fell into despair. He cancelled performances, stopped seeing students, withdrew from society. He would sit in his music room surrounded by his instruments, staring at his treacherous hands, watching them slowly betray him. His wife tried to comfort him, but he pushed her away. Friends visited and found him unreachable, locked in his own suffering. One afternoon, a Zen monk named Master Hui came to his door. Zhang Lin tried to turn him away, but the monk was insistent. "I have traveled for many days to meet you," he said. "Please, just a few moments of your time." Reluctantly, Zhang Lin let him in. The monk looked around the music room, at the beautiful instruments gathering dust, at the scrolls of compositions piled everywhere. He said nothing for a long time, just absorbed the space. Finally, Zhang Lin asked bitterly, "Why did you come?" "To see the great musician brought low. To witness my fall." Master Hui smiled gently. "I came to hear you play. I can't play anymore. Haven't you heard? My hands are dying. Soon I'll be unable to even hold a cup, let alone create music. Then play now, while you still can. Play for me." Zhang Lin felt anger rising. "Why? What's the point? Each time I play might be the last time. The pain is constant. Why torture myself? Why not?" The monk asked simply. "You have hands that still move, however painfully. You have music still in you, however threatened. You have this moment, right now, which is the only moment you've ever truly had. Tomorrow doesn't exist yet. Yesterday is gone. This moment is all any of us ever have. So play." Something in the monk's words cut through Zhang Lin's despair. He looked at his hands, swollen and stiff, but still attached to his body, still capable of movement. He looked at his guqin, waiting silently. He looked at this moment, this very specific present moment, which contained him and his hands and his instrument and this strange monk who had traveled so far. Slowly, Zhang Lin picked up his instrument. He positioned his hands, feeling the familiar weight of the strings beneath his fingers. The pain was there, sharp and insistent, but he let it be there. He didn't fight it or hate it. He simply acknowledged it. Yes, this hurts. And then he began to play. At first, his playing was halting, uncertain. His fingers stumbled over notes they had played perfectly 10,000 times before. But as he continued, something shifted. He stopped trying to play perfectly and simply played what he could play in this moment, with these hands, in this condition. The music that emerged was different from anything he'd created before. It was slower, more deliberate, with spaces where his fingers needed to rest. It was imperfect, marked by the limitations of his failing hands. But it was also heartbreakingly beautiful. It was honest in a way his earlier perfect technique had never been. You could hear the struggle in it, the pain, and also the determination, the love of music so great that it persisted even through suffering. You could hear a man choosing to create even knowing that creation would soon be taken from him. Master Hui listened with closed eyes. When Zhang Lin finally stopped, hands trembling with exhaustion, the monk opened his eyes and they were wet with tears. That, he said, was the most beautiful music I've ever heard. Zhang Lin stared at him. But it was clumsy, full of mistakes. Nothing like my old playing. Your old playing was technically perfect, the monk agreed. It was impressive. It demonstrated mastery. But this playing revealed something deeper, your love of music, your courage in the face of loss, your willingness to make beauty even when beauty comes at a cost. Technical perfection can be cold. This was warm with humanity. Over the following months, as Zhang Lin's condition worsened, he continued to play. Not for audiences, not for applause, but simply because he loved it. Because music was how he understood himself and the world. Because even imperfect music was better than no music at all. His playing became increasingly simple as his hands lost capability. Complex pieces gave way to basic melodies. Eventually, he could play only single notes, plucked slowly, painfully. But people who heard these simple notes said they contained worlds. Each note was so intentional, so full of presence, that it seemed to hold the entire universe in its resonance. Zhang Lin had moved from technical mastery to something beyond technique, pure musical expression, unadorned by virtuosity, naked in its emotional truth. When he could no longer play at all, when his hands finally froze completely, Zhang Lin discovered something unexpected. He could still hear music. Not just external music, but an internal symphony that had always been playing beneath his performances. A current of pure musical understanding that didn't require hands to exist. He began teaching differently, helping students access this internal music, this deep listening that preceded and transcended physical playing. His students said that Zhang Lin became a better teacher after he lost the ability to play. Before, he had taught technique. Now he taught music itself, the essence that lived beneath all technical expression. He would sit with students and have them close their eyes, listening to the silence until they could hear the music that silence contained. He taught them that music wasn't something you made with your hands. Hands were simply one tool for expressing something that existed first in the heart and mind and spirit. Years later, after Zhang Lin died, his students would tell a story about his last days. Completely paralyzed, unable to speak or move, he lay in bed seemingly disconnected from the world. But those who sat with him reported hearing music, soft and ethereal, seeming to emanate from nowhere and everywhere, as if Zhang Lin himself had become music, no longer needing hands or instrument, no longer limited by physical form, pure expression of the beauty he had spent his life pursuing. This teaching reveals the difference between what we do and who we are. Zhang Lin thought his identity was in his hands, in his ability to play. Losing that ability forced him to discover that his true identity was deeper. He was someone who loved music, who understood it, who lived in relationship with it. His hands had been one way of expressing that identity, but not the identity itself. Perhaps you've lost your career and felt you lost yourself. Perhaps illness took your physical capabilities and you thought that's who you were, what you could do. Perhaps age has stolen abilities you relied on to define yourself. This story whispers, you are not what you do. You are what you love. You are what you understand. You are the consciousness that experiences, not the specific forms that experience takes. When Zhang Lin could no longer play with technical mastery, he discovered honest expression. When he could no longer play at all, he discovered teaching. When he could no longer move, he discovered pure being. Each loss revealed a deeper layer of who he was, stripping away the surface identities until only essence remained. Think about your own losses. What were you able to do that you can't do now? What identity have you clung to that's being stripped away? Feel the grief of that. Yes, but also notice you're still here. The you who is reading these words, the consciousness experiencing this moment, that hasn't been lost. It's been revealed. Everything removable has been removed, and what remains is what's actually real. In our culture, we define ourselves by our roles, our abilities, our accomplishments. We're what we do for work. We're our physical capabilities. We're our mental sharpness. But all these things can be taken. Illness takes health. Age takes youth. Circumstance takes career. And when they're gone, we feel we've lost ourselves. But this story says those were never your true self. They were expressions of yourself. Yourself is what remains when all expressions become impossible. The healing comes when you stop trying to preserve old identities and start discovering the identity that can't be taken. Not because that discovery makes loss less painful, it doesn't, but because it reveals that you are more than what was lost. You contain depths that loss can't touch. You are consciousness, awareness, the capacity to love and understand. These things persist regardless of what your body can or cannot do. Just this awareness experiencing this moment, this consciousness that has witnessed everything you've been and will witness everything you become. This essential self that loves, that understands, that continues even when all other things fail. Just this is who you really are. Just this remains when everything else is stripped away. Just this is enough. Breathe slowly now. Let yourself drift deeper. Your body knows how to rest. Your mind can let go. Another story waits in the peaceful dark. The village that burned. In the mountains of northern Vietnam, there was a village called Mai Chau that had stood for over 800 years. Generations had lived there, building terraced rice fields into the steep slopes, constructing homes from bamboo and thatch that seemed to grow naturally from the earth. The village was known for its handicrafts, particularly woven textiles that used techniques passed down mother to daughter for centuries. Life was simple but good, deeply rooted in tradition and connection to the land. Then, on a dry summer afternoon, a cooking fire spread. The wind was strong that day, and within minutes, flames were leaping from house to house. The villagers fought desperately, forming bucket chains from the stream, but the fire moved faster than water could follow. By evening, the entire village was ash. Everything burned: homes, the communal hall, the temple, the looms, the stored grain, the seed rice for next year's planting. Everything. Miraculously, no one died. Everyone escaped, but they stood in the smoking ruins with nothing but the clothes they wore. 800 years of accumulated life reduced to ashes and blackened ground in a single afternoon. The government offered to relocate the survivors to a modern town in the valley. New houses, concrete and tile, electricity, running water, all the conveniences the mountain village had lacked. Many families accepted. They were exhausted, traumatized, ready to leave the place that had betrayed them with fire. They wanted to forget, to start fresh somewhere new. But a small group, maybe 30 families, refused to leave. Led by an elderly woman named Grandmother Lin, who had lived through war and hardship and loss of every kind, they insisted on rebuilding. The government officials were frustrated. Why cling to a destroyed village? Why turn down modern housing for the difficult work of starting over from nothing? Grandmother Lin tried to explain. "This land holds our ancestors," she said. "Their bones are in this earth. Their spirits watch over these fields. If we leave, we break a connection that has lasted 800 years. Some things are worth rebuilding, no matter how hard the work." The group that stayed began clearing the ruins. It was heartbreaking labor. In the ashes, they found melted metal that had been tools, scorched remnants of textiles that represented hundreds of hours of work, fragments of pottery that had been in families for generations. They wanted to weep over every piece, to sit down and give up. But Grandmother Lin kept them moving. "Grieve later," she said. "Work now. We can hold both. Sorrow for what was lost and hope for what we'll build." They started with the essentials: a communal shelter, a well, a simple kitchen. They worked from dawn to dark, every able body contributing. The children carried small stones. The elderly sorted through debris for anything salvageable. The strong ones cut new bamboo and thatched new roofs. Slowly, painfully, the village began to rise again. But it wasn't the same village. It couldn't be. The old village had developed organically over centuries, each generation adding to what came before. This new village had to be imagined all at once, built from conscious choice rather than accumulated tradition. And in that necessity, something unexpected happened. They built it better. The houses were positioned to better catch light and breeze. The communal spaces were larger, more welcoming. They created a new design for looms that was easier on backs and hands. They planted fruit trees that the old village had never had. They incorporated lessons learned from 800 years but weren't bound by traditions that no longer served. An anthropologist visiting the region heard about the rebuilding and came to document it. She was fascinated by what she found. A village that looked ancient but was actually brand new, built with traditional methods but incorporating innovations the old village had resisted. She asked Grandmother Lin if they regretted not moving to the modern town. The old woman laughed. "Some days, yes. When my back hurts from building, when I'm tired and think about running water and electricity. But most days, no. Because we're not just rebuilding houses. We're rebuilding ourselves. We're discovering what matters, what's essential, what we can't live without. The fire took away everything optional. What we're rebuilding is only what we actually need and love." "But you lost so much," the anthropologist said. 800 years of accumulated possessions, traditions, all gone. "We lost the containers," Grandmother Lin corrected gently. "But the essence remains. The knowledge of weaving is still in our hands. The love of this land is still in our hearts. The connection to our ancestors is still in our bones. The fire destroyed the forms, but it couldn't destroy what the forms contained. And now we have the chance to create new forms, better forms, forms we choose consciously rather than inherit unconsciously." She gestured around at the emerging village. "This is our gift from the fire. Not the destruction, that was catastrophe, but the opportunity to rebuild, to choose what to keep and what to release, to create rather than merely maintain. Most villages never get this chance. They carry the weight of every past decision, every tradition that's outlived its purpose, every structure that no longer fits because they're afraid to change. We were forced to change, and in that terrible gift, we found freedom. Over the years, the new Mai Chao became known throughout the region. People would visit to see the village that had risen from ashes. They came expecting to find a tragic place, a lesser version of what had been. Instead, they found vibrant community, beautiful crafts, terraced fields that seemed to sing. The villagers had taken their catastrophe and transformed it into an opportunity for intentional creation. Not everyone who rebuilt there was happy all the time. Some days the grief would rise up, unexpectedly triggered by a scent or sound that reminded them of what was lost. Some still regretted not taking the government houses, especially during difficult seasons. But there was something in their faces that visitors noted, a kind of pride, a sense of ownership over their lives that people in the valley town didn't seem to have. They had chosen this. They had built this with their own hands. Every plank and post and woven wall came from their labor, their vision, their commitment to something larger than individual comfort. Grandmother Lin lived to be over 90. Before she died, she told her granddaughter, "When I pass, don't be too sad. Everything burns eventually. Villages, bodies, lives, all of it. Nothing lasts forever in the form it takes. But the essence continues. We continue. Remember, you are not the house you live in. You are the one who builds houses, who weaves cloth, who plants rice, who loves this land. The fire can take the house, but it can't take you. As long as you remember that, you can survive any burning." This story teaches us about rebuilding after catastrophic loss. When everything is destroyed, when you're standing in the ashes of your life looking at ruins, you have a choice. You can see only what was lost, or you can see the opportunity hidden in the destruction. Not because destruction is good, it isn't, but because sometimes we need everything to burn before we can see clearly what matters. Perhaps you've experienced your own fire. Perhaps addiction destroyed your career, your relationships, your health, leaving you with nothing but a choice: give up or rebuild. Perhaps divorce burned through your life, turning the future you'd planned to ash. Perhaps illness or injury left you starting over from zero, everything you'd built now gone. And you stood in those ashes thinking you had nothing left. This story whispers, you have the most important thing. You have yourself. You have your hands, your mind, your heart, your capacity to build. The fire took the structures, but it couldn't take the builder. And now you get to choose. What do you actually want to rebuild? What really matters? What deserves the precious energy of reconstruction? Think about what was lost. Not all of it was essential. Some of it was dead weight you were carrying out of obligation or habit or fear of change. Some traditions no longer served you. Some relationships were already over, but you hadn't admitted it. Some aspects of your old life were keeping you small, keeping you stuck, keeping you from becoming who you needed to become. The fire cleared all that away. Painfully, yes, but also completely. Now you're free to rebuild consciously. You don't have to recreate what was lost. You can create something new, something better suited to who you are now, who you're becoming. You can incorporate the lessons of your loss into the structure of your new life. You can build with wisdom earned through suffering, with priorities clarified by catastrophe, with values you've discovered are truly non-negotiable. In our modern world, we insure against loss, back up our data, try to protect ourselves from having to start over. And these protections are good, reasonable, necessary. But sometimes loss happens anyway, despite all precautions. And when it does, we can spend our energy mourning what should have been protected, or we can use that energy to rebuild something authentic, intentional, true. The healing doesn't come from minimizing what was lost. It comes from recognizing what remains, your essential self, your capacity to create, your freedom to choose what you rebuild and how you rebuild it. You are not the house that burned. You are the one who builds houses. And that one, that builder, that essential you, the fire couldn't touch. Just this capacity to rebuild, this freedom to choose, this opportunity hidden in catastrophe to create consciously rather than inherit unconsciously. Just this is what remains when everything else burns. Just this is enough to begin again. Your breath continues, steady as a river. Your body grows heavier, more relaxed. Let yourself sink further into rest as the next story unfolds. The scholar's empty page. In the imperial city during the Song dynasty, there lived a scholar named Chen who was renowned for his poetry. His verses were celebrated at court, memorized by students, inscribed on walls and monuments. Emperors requested his poems for special occasions. When Chen wrote, his words seemed to capture something essential about beauty, loss, nature, and time. His poetry was his legacy, his immortality, his contribution to the eternal conversation of Chinese literature. Chen had studied poetry since boyhood, mastering the classical forms, reading every great poet who had come before. He understood meter, imagery, allusion, how to lay a meaning in a few perfectly chosen characters. His poems took months to compose, each one refined through hundreds of revisions until every word was exactly right. He was meticulous, brilliant, uncompromising in his pursuit of perfection. But as Chen aged, something began to change. His poems came more slowly. He would sit for hours with brush in hand, staring at blank paper, unable to write. Not because he lacked ideas. His mind teemed with images and phrases, but because nothing seemed good enough. Every line he considered seemed pedestrian, derivative, unworthy of his reputation. The standards he had set for himself now paralyzed him. Months passed without a single completed poem. Then, a year. Chen's patrons grew concerned. His students wondered. His rivals whispered that he had exhausted his gift, that his best work was behind him. Chen himself fell into despair. Who was he if he couldn't write? What was his value if his one talent had abandoned him? He tried everything to break the block. He traveled to beautiful landscapes, hoping for inspiration. He drank wine to loosen his inhibitions. He forced himself to write, producing verses that he immediately destroyed. Nothing worked. The blank page remained blank, mocking him with its emptiness. One day, a Taoist monk named Lu passed through the city and heard about the great poet who could no longer write. Lu was curious and sought Chen out. He found the scholar sitting in his study, surrounded by crumpled papers, staring at a fresh sheet with desperate eyes. "I hear you cannot write," Lu said without preamble. Chen didn't look up. I can write. I just can't write anything worth reading. May I see your latest attempt? Chen gestured at the trash littering the floor. Take your pick. All failures. Lu retrieved several crumpled pages, smoothed them, read them carefully. When he finished, he said, "These are beautiful." "They're garbage," Chen snapped. "Cliched, clumsy, nothing like my earlier work." "How do you know?" "I just know. I've written hundreds of poems. I recognize quality." Lu was quiet for a moment. Then he asked, "What are you trying to accomplish with your poetry?" "To create beauty, to say something true, to contribute something lasting to literature." "And who decides if you've succeeded?" "I do. The critics. History. So you're writing for yourself, for critics who may or may not exist, and for people who won't be born for centuries." Chen frowned. "What other purpose is there?" Lu smiled. "May I tell you a story? There was once a monk who spent 20 years creating a beautiful sand mandala. Every grain of colored sand placed with perfect precision, creating an image of the entire universe, intricate and vast. When it was finished, it was the most beautiful thing anyone had ever seen. Monks came from distant monasteries to witness it. And then, the moment it was complete, the creator took a broom and swept it away. All that work, destroyed in seconds. Do you know why?" Chen shook his head. "Because the mandala's purpose wasn't to exist. It was to be created. The value was in the making, not the made. In the attention, the devotion, the 20 years of absolute presence. The sweeping away was part of the teaching. Everything passes. Nothing lasts. Attachment to outcomes creates suffering. The monk was free because he made beauty without clinging to it." Chen felt something shift in his chest. "Are you saying my poetry doesn't matter?" "I'm saying maybe you're asking it to matter in the wrong way. You want it to be perfect, to last forever, to prove your worth. But poetry isn't about proof. It's about expression. It's about being human enough to notice beauty and caring enough to point it out. Whether it's perfect or imperfect, whether it lasts or fades, whether anyone remembers it, those concerns are external to the actual work of writing." That night, Chen couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the sand mandala, about making beauty without clinging to it. What would it feel like to write a poem knowing he would destroy it immediately? Would he write differently? Would he write at all? At dawn, he took up his brush. But instead of trying to write a great poem, he simply wrote what he saw. Sunlight on his garden wall, the way morning shadows shifted, a bird's sudden song. He wrote quickly, without revision, without judgment. When he finished, he looked at it. It was simple, unpolished, nothing like his famous earlier work. It probably wasn't very good. He started to crumple it, then stopped. Instead, he set it aside and wrote another. And another. He spent the entire day writing, not trying to create masterpieces, but simply practicing the act of writing itself. Noticing, expressing, letting the words come without interrogating whether they were worthy. At the end of the day, he had written 20 poems. Some were terrible. Some had moments of beauty. None were perfect. He looked at the pile and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Joy. Not pride in accomplishment, but simple happiness at having spent a day doing what he loved, freed from the burden of needing it to be anything other than what it was. Chen didn't become less accomplished. If anything, his later poems, written without the crushing weight of perfectionism, were more immediate, more alive. Critics noticed a change in his work, less polished perhaps, but more honest, more human. They said his late-period poems were his best, though Chen himself never bothered to judge them. He wrote them, he released them, and he moved on. Years later, a student asked Chen what had changed, how he had broken through his paralysis. Chen thought about the question carefully before answering. I stopped trying to write poetry that would prove I was a great poet. I started writing poetry because I loved language and wanted to play with it. I stopped writing for history and started writing for this moment. I stopped clinging to outcomes and started enjoying process. The poetry didn't get better, necessarily, but I got better at being someone who writes poetry. This teaching addresses the paralysis that perfectionism creates. When we hold ourselves to impossible standards, when we judge everything we do by whether it's our best work, worthy of remembering, good enough to share, we often end up doing nothing at all. The blank page stays blank because anything we put on it seems inadequate. Perhaps you've experienced this. Perhaps you want to write, but everything you write seems terrible compared to published authors you admire. Perhaps you want to paint, but your work looks amateurish. Perhaps you want to start a business, but fear it won't be successful. Perhaps you want to reach out to someone, but worry your words won't be perfect. So you do nothing. You stay blocked, paralyzed, waiting for the moment when you'll be good enough to try. This story whispers, you're asking your work to carry a weight it was never meant to carry. You're asking it to prove your worth, to justify your existence, to earn you immortality. But work doesn't have to do any of that. Work just has to be work. The honest effort to make or do or express something. Everything else is extra weight that will crush you before you begin. Think about something you're not doing because you fear it won't be good enough. What would happen if you did it anyway? Knowing it might not be great, accepting that it might fail, making it simply for the joy of making. What if you wrote the bad poem, made the clumsy painting, started the uncertain business, said the imperfect words? What if you valued process over product, expression over perfection, doing over being good at doing? In our culture, we celebrate excellence, mastery, the best. We're shown finished products, polished performances, people at the top of their fields. We rarely see the thousands of hours of clumsy practice that preceded mastery. We rarely see the failed attempts, the mediocre efforts, the learning process. So we think we should start excellent, and when we're not, we quit before we've really started. But Chen's story reminds us, the practice itself is the point. The hours spent writing, whether you produce masterpieces or garbage, the effort to express, whether you express it well or poorly, the willingness to be imperfect, to be a beginner, to make things that aren't very good yet. That willingness is what eventually creates skill, but more importantly, it creates a life of engagement rather than paralyzed perfectionism. The healing from creative block, from fear of imperfection, from paralysis of any kind, comes when you let go of outcomes and embrace process. When you do the thing because you love doing it, not because you love what results from doing it. When you write to write, paint to paint, try to try, not to prove anything or achieve anything, but simply to engage fully with this moment, this effort, this honest attempt to be alive. Just this imperfect effort, this flawed attempt, this willingness to be less than perfect in order to be something at all. Just this is enough. Just this is how anything worthwhile begins. Just this is the healing, choosing presence over perfection, choosing to act over fear of acting badly, choosing to live rather than wait to be ready to live. Let your eyes grow heavier. Let your mind grow quieter. You are held by this story, this darkness, this gentle current carrying you towards sleep. Rest as another tale begins. The gardener's winter. At the edge of a small town in the mountains of Bhutan, there lived an old gardener named Sonam, whose garden was famous throughout the region. People would travel for days just to walk through it, to see the riot of colors, smell the mingled fragrances, experience the sense of peace that seemed to emanate from the carefully tended beds and pathways. Sonam had worked this garden for 40 years, and it was his masterpiece, his meditation, his gift to the world. The garden contained hundreds of species, flowering shrubs from the valleys, alpine plants from the high peaks, medicinal herbs, vegetables, fruit trees. Each plant was placed with careful attention to light, soil, companionship with other plants. The garden was alive in a way that went beyond mere horticulture. It seemed to have a spirit, a presence, as if it were a single living entity rather than a collection of individual plants. Sonam spent every day in his garden, from dawn to dusk. He knew each plant intimately, could tell you its needs, its history, where he'd obtained its seeds or cutting. He pruned with perfect timing, watered with exact amounts, fed the soil what it needed. His hands were permanently stained with earth. His knees bore the marks of kneeling on soil for decades. The garden was not just his work. It was his identity, his purpose, the visible expression of his soul. Then, one autumn, Sonam suffered a stroke. He survived, but the left side of his body was paralyzed. He could walk with a cane, slowly and awkwardly. He could use his right hand, but his left hung useless. Simple tasks became monumental efforts. And working in the garden, the physical labor that had filled his days for 40 years, became impossible. From his window, Sonam watched the garden with heartbreak. The precise watering schedule he'd maintained was disrupted. Weeds began appearing. Dead flowers went unpruned. Without constant attention, the garden began to decline. Slowly at first, then more rapidly. His neighbors tried to help, but they didn't know the garden like he did. They overwatered some plants and underwatered others. They pruned at the wrong times. They meant well, but they were amateurs, and the garden showed it. Sonam fell into a depression so deep his family feared he wouldn't survive it. He wouldn't eat properly. He wouldn't speak. He just sat at his window, watching his beloved garden die, feeling that he was dying with it. What was he without his garden? What purpose did his life have if he couldn't tend the one thing he'd created? Winter came, and with it, snow. The garden disappeared beneath white blankets, all color and form erased. Sonam stared at the blank whiteness, feeling it matched the emptiness inside him. Everything gone. Everything lost. everything ended. One morning, his granddaughter Karma came to visit. She was 10 years old, bright and perceptive. She found Sonam at his usual post by the window, staring at the snow-covered garden with dead eyes. "Grandfather," she said, "tell me about the garden." "There's nothing to tell. It's gone." "It's not gone. It's resting. It's dying. I killed it by becoming useless." Karma climbed into his lap, something she hadn't done since she was much smaller. "Grandfather, you taught me about gardens. Don't you remember? You said winter is when the garden gathers strength for spring. You said the cold helps seeds sleep so they can dream of growing. You said rest is part of the cycle, not separate from it." Sonam felt tears on his face. That was just talk. "This is different. This is failure." "Why?" "Because I can't take care of it anymore. Because my body betrayed me. Because everything I built is falling apart." Karma was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Grandfather, when you taught me about planting seeds, you said the seed has to break apart for the plant to grow. You said the shell that protected the seed has to crack, has to die, so the new thing can emerge. Maybe that's happening to you. Maybe your old life is the shell, and it's cracking so something new can grow." Sonam looked at his granddaughter with wonder. When had she become so wise? Or had he simply been too lost in his own grief to notice? "What new thing could possibly grow?" he asked. "I don't know," she said honestly. "But the seed doesn't know either, does it? It just trusts the process. It breaks apart and something emerges. Maybe you just have to trust too." That conversation stayed with Sonam through the long winter. He thought about seeds and shells and the necessity of breaking. He thought about how he'd taught the very lessons he now needed to learn himself. He had told others that gardens go through cycles, that apparent death precedes new life, that letting go is part of the natural order. But he hadn't been applying those truths to his own life. Slowly, painfully, Sonam began to shift his relationship with the garden. He couldn't tend it physically anymore. That was true. But he could teach others. His neighbors, who'd been trying to help, they needed instruction. So Sonam began receiving them, teaching them what he knew, guiding them in the care of different plants. It was frustrating at first. They made mistakes. They didn't understand subtleties. But gradually, they learned. More importantly, teaching forced Sonam to articulate knowledge he'd held only in his hands for decades. He had to translate physical knowing into words, to make explicit what had been implicit. In this process, he understood his own knowledge more deeply. Teaching, he discovered, was its own kind of tending. When spring came and the snow melted, the garden emerged changed. It wasn't the same as it had been under Sonam's solo care. It was wilder in some places, more experimental in others. His helpers had planted things he never would have chosen, had arranged beds differently than he would have arranged them. At first, this pained him. But as he watched the garden through the season, he noticed something unexpected. It was still beautiful. Different, yes, but alive, vital, growing. The garden had become a community project. Children came to plant vegetables. Teenagers maintained the pathways. Elderly neighbors sat in the shade and pulled weeds within reach. The garden now belonged to many people instead of just one. And in belonging to many, It had taken on a new character, more diverse, more playful, less perfect, but more alive with human presence. One summer evening, Sonam was sitting in his usual chair, watching people moving through the garden, when Karma came and sat beside him. She was older now, nearly grown, preparing to leave for university. "It's different than it was," she observed. "Yes. Do you hate that?" Sonam was quiet for a long time. Then he smiled. "I thought I would. I thought I'd watch my garden being destroyed by incompetent hands. But something else happened. It became more than my garden. It became our garden. And our garden is teaching me something my garden never could." "What's that?" "That holding on too tightly kills the thing we love. That sharing brings unexpected life. That my way wasn't the only way, just one way among many. That I am not the garden. I was the gardener of the garden, and that's a beautiful role. But when I couldn't be gardener anymore, the garden found other gardeners. Life continued. Beauty continued. I continued, just in a different relationship to what I loved." He gestured at the garden, where a group of children were laughing as they watered vegetables. "I couldn't have created this. I was too concerned with perfection, with control, with maintaining my vision. My stroke forced me to let go, and in letting go, I gave the garden space to become something larger than my individual effort. That's the gift hidden in my loss. The garden outgrew me. And that's exactly what gardens are supposed to do." This story teaches us about adapting to loss of ability. When our bodies betray us, when we can no longer do what we've always done, when the role we've filled for decades becomes impossible, we face a choice. We can see only what's lost, or we can discover what's still possible in a changed form. Sonam couldn't be a gardener in the old way, but he could be a teacher, a guide, a voice of experience. He couldn't tend every plant individually, but he could tend a community of gardeners. His role transformed, and in transforming, it expanded. He influenced more people, taught more deeply, created something larger than what he'd created alone. Perhaps you've experienced this. Perhaps illness or injury has taken physical capabilities you relied on. Perhaps age has stolen strength or stamina or precision you once had. Perhaps circumstance has removed you from a role that defined you, and you feel useless, purposeless, like Sonam watching his garden decline while he sat helpless at the window. This story whispers, you're thinking too narrowly about your purpose. You defined yourself by one expression of your love, one way of contributing. But love and contribution can take many forms. You may not be able to do what you used to do, but you can do something else. Something that wasn't possible when you were fully capable in the old way. Think about what you've lost and how you've defined yourself by that loss. I was a nurse. Now I can't work. But you're not lost nursing. You're lost one expression of caring for people. What other expressions might be possible? Teaching nursing students. Volunteering to sit with lonely hospital patients. Writing about your experiences to help others understand healthcare. Your essence, the caring that drove you to nursing, that remains. In our culture, we have rigid ideas about valuable roles. We celebrate the doer, the maker, the active contributor. We struggle to value the teacher, the advisor, the one who supports others to do. But both are essential. Sometimes we have to lose the ability to do so. We can discover the ability to guide others in doing. The healing from loss of capability doesn't come from pretending you can still do what you can't. It comes from discovering what's now possible that wasn't possible before. What can you do from this limited position that you couldn't do from your formerly unlimited one? How can your experience, your hard-won wisdom, your understanding of what matters, serve others even when your body can't? Just this changed role, this new form of contribution, this different way of expressing the same essential love that has always driven you. Just this is enough. Just this is how life continues, even when the old life ends. Just this is the healing, not return to what was, but arrival at what is. Finding value in this moment's possibilities, rather than mourning last moment's losses. Feel your breathing. So slow now, so easy. Your body has surrendered to rest. Your mind drifts peacefully. Let the next story find you in the gentle dark. The weaver's unfinished cloth. In a village renowned for its textiles, there lived a weaver named Ayako, whose work was considered the finest in generations. Her fabrics were collected by museums, worn by dignitaries, treasured as family heirlooms. Each piece took months to create. Threads of silk and gold woven into patterns so intricate they seemed impossibly complex. Yet when finished, they possessed a perfect harmony that made all that complexity feel inevitable and right. Ayako had learned weaving from her mother and grandmother, part of a family tradition stretching back centuries. But she had surpassed them all, pushing the craft to new heights of ambition and beauty. She worked 12, 14 hours a day at her loom, completely absorbed in the rhythm of warp and weft, the slow emergence of pattern from chaos of thread. For 5 years, Ayako had been working on her masterpiece, a ceremonial kimono cloth that would incorporate every technique she'd mastered, every innovation she'd developed, everything she'd learned in 30 years at the loom. The pattern was impossibly intricate, a landscape of mountains and rivers and seasons, all woven with threads of silver and gold and silk in 100 colors. When finished, it would be her crowning achievement, the work that would define her legacy. She had already woven 4 of the 5 panels needed. Each panel had taken a year. They hung in her workshop, marvels of craftsmanship. One more panel and it would be complete. One more year of work and she would achieve what she'd been striving toward all her adult life. Then, on an ordinary morning, while weaving the final panel, Ayako felt a strange weakness in her hands. She tried to continue, but her fingers wouldn't grip the threads properly. She tried again, and again, growing frustrated and then frightened. By afternoon, she could barely hold her shuttle. By evening, her hands were trembling uncontrollably. The diagnosis was devastating, a progressive neurological condition that would gradually destroy her fine motor control. It had been developing slowly for years, barely noticeable until it reached a threshold. Now it would progress rapidly. She might have weeks, perhaps months, before her hands lost all precision. After that, she would never weave again. Ayako threw herself into finishing the panel. She worked through pain, through frustration, through episodes where her hands simply wouldn't obey her will. But the condition progressed faster than she'd hoped. Her work, always so precise, became uneven. Threads that should have been perfectly aligned wandered. Patterns that should have been crisp became muddied. What she was producing no longer met her standards. It wasn't good enough to be part of her masterpiece. She tried for 3 months, growing more desperate, more heartbroken, watching her ability drain away while the unfinished panel mocked her from the loom. Finally, she had to accept the truth. She would never finish it. Her masterpiece would remain incomplete. The vision she'd held for 5 years would never be realized. All that work, all that time, all that hope, for nothing. Ayako fell into a grief so profound she couldn't function. She wouldn't eat, wouldn't sleep, wouldn't see visitors. She sat in her workshop surrounded by the 4 perfect panels and the 1 incomplete panel, the visible symbol of her failure. She had dedicated her entire adult life to this moment, this achievement, this proof of her skill and vision, and now she would never reach it. Her daughter Michiko, a professor of art history, came to stay with her. She found her mother hollow-eyed, barely responsive. Michiko tried everything to comfort her, but nothing reached through her mother's despair. One evening, Michiko made tea and sat down across from her mother. She said, "I've been thinking about the unfinished panel." Ayako closed her eyes, unable to bear even talking about it. "Mother, listen. In all the museums I've visited, all the exhibitions I've curated, do you know what the most powerful works are? Not the perfect ones, the unfinished ones. Michelangelo's unfinished sculptures, half emerged from marble. Bach's unfinished fugue, breaking off mid-phrase. They're powerful precisely because they're incomplete. They show the process, the human struggle, the moment when limitation met vision. They're honest in a way finished works can never be." Ayako opened her eyes. "That's different. Those were great artists. Their unfinished works are valuable because they made other finished works that proved their genius. I have nothing. I will have no completed masterpiece. Only failure. You have the 4 panels. You have 30 years of completed work. You have a lifetime of textiles that museums treasure. And now you have this." Michiko gestured at the incomplete panel. "Mother, this tells a story the finished kimono never could. It shows the reality of creative work, that we're vulnerable, that bodies fail, that visions sometimes exceed what we're given time to complete. That's not failure. That's the human condition. But it's not what I intended. No. It's what happened. And sometimes what happens is more interesting than what we intended. You set out to make a perfect finished object. You ended up making something else, a meditation on impermanence, on the gap between vision and reality, on the beauty of trying even when completion becomes impossible. You made a teaching, Mother, maybe a more important teaching than a perfect kimono would have been." Over the following weeks, Michiko convinced her mother to exhibit the piece unfinished. Ayako was terrified, certain she would be seen as a failure, that her incomplete work would diminish her reputation. But she trusted her daughter. The exhibition opened in Tokyo. The 4 perfect panels were displayed, and beside them, the 5th panel, incomplete, clearly showing where Ayako's control had begun to fail, where the pattern had started to unravel, where she'd had to stop. A small placard explained the situation. The weaver's hands had failed before her vision could be completed. The response stunned Ayako. Visitors wept before the incomplete panel. Critics wrote that it was the most moving piece in the exhibition. People said it made them think about their own unfinished projects, their own thwarted ambitions. The gap between what they'd hoped to accomplish and what their lives had actually allowed. They saw themselves in that incomplete pattern, and it gave them permission to value their own incomplete works, their own interrupted efforts. One elderly man stood before the panel for a long time, tears streaming down his face. When Michiko asked if he was all right, he said, "I spent 40 years writing a novel. I never finished it. I thought that meant my life's work was worthless. But seeing this, I understand the work itself had value. The 40 years of trying, of learning, of growing as a writer. Whether I finished or not, those years were not wasted. She's teaching me that through her unfinished cloth." Ayako overheard this conversation. Something in her chest, something that had been clenched tight with grief, began to loosen. She had been so focused on the finished object that she'd lost sight of the process, the journey, the years of work that had value independent of completion. Years later, the incomplete kimono was acquired by a major museum, where it was displayed with her other works. The curator explained that the incomplete panel had become the most famous piece in Ayako's career, not despite its incompleteness, but because of it. It spoke to something universal. We all have unfinished projects, unlived dreams, visions that exceeded our capacity to realize them. And those incomplete works, those interrupted efforts, those abandoned hopes, they're not failures. They're evidence that we tried, that we reached, that we aimed for something beyond our grasp. That's not shameful. That's beautiful. This story teaches us about making peace with incompletion. So much of our suffering comes from unfinished business, incomplete projects, dreams that never materialized, goals we didn't reach. We judge ourselves harshly for what we didn't accomplish, seeing incompletion as failure. But this teaching says, maybe incompletion is just the natural state of things. Maybe very little in life actually gets completed in the way we envision. Maybe that's okay. Think about your own life. What have you started and not finished? What did you hope to accomplish that remains undone? What vision did you have that reality didn't match? Perhaps you intended to be further in your career by now. Perhaps you imagined a different kind of family life. Perhaps you started creative projects you never completed, education you never finished, relationships you couldn't sustain, dreams that proved impossible. This story whispers the value wasn't in completion. It was in the trying, in the years or months or days you spent moving toward that vision, in what you learned, who you became, how you grew through the effort. The incomplete project is not evidence of failure. It's evidence that you tried something difficult, that you reached beyond your certainty, that you valued something enough to pursue it even without guarantee of success. In our culture, we celebrate finishes. We want to hear about people who completed their degrees, launched their businesses, wrote their books, achieved their goals. We don't make space for the much more common experience of starting something and having life interrupt it, of pursuing a dream and having circumstances shut it down, of reaching for a vision and having our hands fail before we get there. But most of life is like Ayako's cloth, beautiful in parts, imperfect throughout, incomplete at the end. Very few of us actually finish everything we start, accomplish everything we envision, realize every dream we've had. That doesn't mean our efforts were wasted. It means we're human, limited by time and circumstance and body's failures, doing our best with what we're given. The healing comes when we stop judging ourselves by completion and start valuing ourselves by effort, by sincerity, by the courage it took to try it all. When we understand that incomplete doesn't mean failed, just means honest. Honest about the gap between vision and reality. Honest about our limitations. Honest about the fact that sometimes our hands give out before our dreams do. Just this incomplete project, this interrupted effort, this dream that exceeded your capacity to realize it, just this is evidence of your ambition, your courage, your willingness to reach for something difficult. Just this is enough. The masterpiece was never the finished object. The masterpiece was you, trying, growing, becoming more through the effort, even when the effort didn't lead to completion. Breathe softly now. Your mind grows quieter with each word. Your body rests deeply. Let yourself drift towards sleep as the stories continue. The teacher's last student. In a meditation center in the hills of Korea, there was a Zen master named Musang who had taught for 40 years. Hundreds of students had studied with him, many achieving deep insights, some becoming teachers themselves. Musang was known for his fierce compassion, for pushing students past their comfortable limitations, for not accepting surface understanding but demanding they encounter truth directly, in their own experience. Now, at 80 years old, Musang was dying. Cancer had spread through his body, and he had perhaps weeks remaining. His students gathered around him, devastated, wanting to spend these final days with the teacher who had changed their lives. They came from around the world, former students now grey-haired themselves, wanting to express gratitude, to sit one last time with their master. But Musang had one final student he was teaching, and this student occupied all his remaining energy. Her name was Ji-won, and she had arrived at the center only 6 months before Musang's diagnosis. She was 30 years old, recently divorced, recovering from addiction, broken by life in ways that made her both desperate and resistant. She had come to meditation as a last resort, expecting nothing, hoping for everything. Musang had seen something in her, some potential that no one else recognized. While other students were practicing advanced techniques, studying ancient texts, having profound realizations, Musang worked with Ji-won on the most basic practice, simply sitting, being present with whatever arose, not running from pain or grasping after peace. Just sitting, just being, just returning again and again to this breath, this moment, this actually existing reality. It was agonizingly difficult for Ji-won. She wanted spiritual experiences, transcendent insights, something to prove that all her suffering had meaning. Instead, Musang gave her just sitting, just breathing, just being with what is. Over and over, she would come to him frustrated, angry, certain she was failing, that meditation wasn't working for her, that she was too broken to be helped. And Musang would smile and say, "Good. Sit with that. Don't try to fix it. Just be present with your frustration, your anger, your certainty of failure. That's the practice." As Musang grew weaker, other students whispered among themselves, why was he wasting his precious remaining energy on this difficult beginner? Why wasn't he sharing his deepest teachings with them, his advanced students, the ones who could understand and carry forward his legacy? Why spend his dying days with someone who was barely making progress? One evening, one of the senior students approached Musang and voiced these concerns respectfully. "Teacher, we understand you care about all students. But you're dying. Your time is precious. Why not spend it with those of us who can receive your deepest teachings, who can preserve and transmit what you've learned in 40 years of teaching?" Musang looked at him for a long time. Then he said, "Tell me, what is my deepest teaching?" The senior student thought carefully. That all things are empty of inherent existence. That true nature is beyond words and concepts. That enlightenment and delusion are not separate. These are the profound truths you've taught us. And Jiwon, Musang asked, "What am I teaching her?" "Just sitting. Just basic presence. Nothing profound." Musang smiled. "Exactly. I'm teaching her that this moment, exactly as it is enough. I'm teaching her that she doesn't need to be different, better, more spiritual, more enlightened. I'm teaching her that her broken, messy, imperfect life is the perfect place to wake up. This is the deepest teaching. This is what I've been trying to teach you for 40 years. But you were too busy looking for something profound to notice how simple it is." He paused, breathing with difficulty. "Ji-won is my last student. She will be my last teaching. She will understand what many of you still don't, that this is it. This ordinary moment, this painful breath, this disappointment that practice isn't more special. This is the teaching. Not the words about it, but the actual experience of just this, just now, just as it is." The senior student bowed and left, chastened and thoughtful. In the final weeks of Musang's life, he met with Ji-won daily. They barely spoke. They would sit together, Musang's breath labored and painful, Ji-won's mind restless and afraid. Neither was having transcendent experiences. Both were just present with what was actually happening. A man dying, a woman watching him die. Both breathing, both in pain, both utterly human. One morning, Ji-won arrived to find Musang could barely speak. She sat beside his bed, tears streaming down her face. She felt useless, inadequate, like she should be saying or doing something meaningful, but not knowing what. She started to apologize. "I'm sorry I'm not a better student. I'm sorry I haven't understood your teachings. I'm sorry I'm just crying instead of being enlightened." Musang reached out and took her hand with his remaining strength. He managed to whisper, "Perfect. This, exactly this. Just this crying. Just this feeling inadequate. Just this being present anyway. You understand everything." Ji-won didn't feel like she understood anything. She just sat there, holding her dying teacher's hand, crying, feeling scared and sad and confused. But she stayed. She didn't run from it or try to make it different. She just sat with what was actually happening. Musang died 3 days later, with Ji-won sitting beside him. She was not enlightened. She had no great realization. She just witnessed her teacher's last breath and felt the immensity of loss. And she sat with it, all of it, exactly as it was. Years later, Ji-won became a teacher herself, though she never claimed any special understanding. When students came to her seeking profound insights, cosmic experiences, transcendent realizations, she would have them sit. Just sit. Be present with whatever arose. And she would tell them about Musang's last teaching, that this is it. This ordinary moment, this imperfect presence, this willingness to be here, exactly as we are, with no pretense of being more spiritual or enlightened than we actually are. This is the deepest teaching. This is what all the fancy words point toward. Just this, just now, just as it is. This story reveals the essence of healing through presence. Not presence as a technique to achieve some other state, but presence itself as the healing, as the point, as what we're always looking for in increasingly complicated places when it's been here all along in the simple fact of being alive, aware, present to experience. Perhaps you've been searching for the key to healing your wounds, the method that will finally fix you, the insight that will make everything make sense. Perhaps you've read books, tried therapies, meditated, done the work, always seeking the thing that will transform you from broken to whole. And perhaps you're frustrated because nothing has worked completely. Nothing has fixed you. You're still damaged, still imperfect, still struggling. This story whispers, you're looking for something you already have. The healing isn't in some future state of enlightenment or recovery. It's in being present to this moment, exactly as it is, including all the pain and confusion and imperfection. It's in showing up for your actual life instead of waiting for the perfect life to begin once you're healed. Think about right now. This moment, this breath. You're here. You're alive. You're experiencing something. That's it. That's the miracle. Not some special spiritual state, but just this ordinary fact of existing, of awareness, of being present to what is. You don't have to be different. You don't have to be healed first. You don't have to be enlightened or perfected or fixed. You just have to be here, noticing that you are here, willing to experience what being here actually involves. In our self-help culture, we're always trying to become better versions of ourselves. We read books on healing, practice techniques for transformation, work on ourselves like we're projects to be completed. And there's value in that work. But sometimes the work becomes another way of avoiding the simple truth. You're already here. You're already alive. You're already whole enough to be present to this moment, which is the only moment that actually exists. The healing Musang taught Ji-won wasn't healing as transformation from broken to fixed. It was healing as acceptance of what is, as presence with what's actually happening, as willingness to be here in this life, this body, this moment, without needing it to be different before you fully show up for it. Just this ordinary moment, this imperfect presence, this life exactly as it is, not as you wish it were. Just this is what all the teachings point toward. Just this is what you've been seeking. Just this is enough. Just this is the healing. Not escape from what is, but full arrival in what is, bringing all of yourself, broken places and all, to the simple act of being here now. Your breathing is so slow now, so peaceful, your body completely at rest, your mind drifting in the warm darkness. One more story waits, and then you'll sleep. The phoenix's ashes. In ancient Tibet, high in mountains where the air is so thin that breathing itself becomes meditation, there was a monastery known for its library. The library contained texts spanning 1,000 years, sutras copied by hand, commentaries by great masters, tantric teachings passed down through lineages, medical texts, philosophical treatises, poetry, history. It was one of the most important Buddhist libraries in the world, and monks traveled for months just to study there for a few weeks. The head librarian was a monk named Tenzin Dorje, who had devoted his entire adult life to these texts. He had spent 40 years cataloging, preserving, studying, teaching from these precious manuscripts. He knew every text, where it came from, what wisdom it contained, how it related to other teachings. The library was not just his work. It was his spiritual practice, his meditation, his service to the Dharma. One winter night, fire broke out in the library. No one knew how it started. Perhaps a candle tipped over, perhaps an ember from the heating stove. But the old wooden building, filled with ancient dry paper and old timber, burned with terrifying speed. The monks formed bucket lines, trying desperately to save the texts, running into the burning building again and again to rescue what they could. But the fire was too fast, too hot, too hungry. By dawn, the library was ashes. 1,000 years of accumulated wisdom, countless hours of copying and commentary, teachings that existed nowhere else in the world, all reduced to char and ash and smoke. Tenzin Dorje stood in the ruins, his face blackened with soot, his hands blistered from carrying hot texts, his robe singed. Other monks stood around him, weeping, devastated by the magnitude of the loss. But Tenzin Dorje was silent, his eyes distant, as if he were seeing something others couldn't see. The abbot approached him gently. "Tenzin, are you all right?" Tenzin Dorje was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I don't know. Ask me later." For 3 days, Tenzin Dorje sat in his room, barely eating, speaking to no one. The other monks worried he had lost his mind with grief. On the 4th day, he emerged and asked the abbot to gather all the monks in the meditation hall. When they were assembled, Tenzin Dorje stood before them. His eyes were clear, his bearing calm. He said, "I have spent 3 days considering what we lost in the fire, and I have realized something important. We lost nothing essential." The monks stirred, confused. How could he say they'd lost nothing? 1,000 years of texts were gone. Tenzin Dorje continued. All those texts, what did they contain? They contained teachings. And where do teachings live? They live in understanding. They live in realization. They live in the minds and hearts of those who have studied and practiced them. The paper was never the teaching. The paper was only pointing toward the teaching. He looked around at his fellow monks. All of us have studied these texts. We have memorized sutras, contemplated meanings, practiced what we learned. The understanding we gained, the realizations we achieved, the transformation these teachings created in us, that wasn't in the library. That's in us. The fire didn't touch that. An older monk spoke up. "But Master, those texts were unique. Some existed in no other library. How will future students learn from them?" "We will teach them," Tenzin Dorje said simply. "The texts I studied most deeply, I know by heart. What I don't remember precisely, I remember essentially. And more importantly, I remember what those texts taught me about the nature of reality, about the path, about the purpose of practice. I can share that understanding. All of us can. We are the library now. We are living texts, breathing sutras, walking teachings." He gestured to the windows, where morning light was streaming in. The Buddha didn't write texts. He spoke to people directly, heart to heart. His teachings were oral for hundreds of years before anyone wrote them down. We've been so focused on preserving written words that we forgot. Teachings are transmitted through living relationship, through one mind touching another mind, through demonstration more than documentation. Perhaps the fire came to remind us of this. Another monk asked, "So we don't rebuild the library?" Of course we rebuild. We'll ask other monasteries to send copies of texts they have. We'll rewrite from memory what we can. We'll create a new library. But we won't make the same mistake again. What mistake? Thinking the teachings are in the books rather than in the understanding. Books are wonderful tools, precious repositories. But they're tools, not the point. The point is awakening, and you can't burn awakening. You can't destroy realization. You can burn the finger pointing at the moon, but you can't burn the moon itself. In the months and years that followed, Tenzin Dorje did something unexpected. Instead of immediately rebuilding the library in its former style, he created a new model. Yes, they would have books, copied and collected as before. But more importantly, they would have living teachers. Each monk who had studied particular texts deeply would teach those texts to younger monks, not just lecturing about them, but transmitting the understanding those texts had created in them. The library became not just a building full of books, but a community of teachers and students, a living transmission of wisdom. What emerged was richer than what had been lost. The old library had been vast but somewhat dead. Texts sitting on shelves, occasionally studied, but mostly just preserved. The new library was smaller in written material, but more alive. Every text they rebuilt through practice and transmission, through one generation teaching the next, not just the words but the meaning, not just the concepts but the realization. Years later, scholars visiting the monastery would comment that studying there was different from other libraries. The texts were important, but the real teaching came through relationship with the monks, through dialogue and practice and direct transmission of understanding. The library had become what it was always meant to be, not a warehouse for information, but a place where wisdom was kept alive through practice and shared through presence. When Tenzin Dorje was dying, many years after the fire, a young monk asked him, "Master, do you regret the loss of the original library?" Tenzin Dorje smiled. "I grieved it. Yes. But regret? No. That fire burned away my attachment to form while leaving the essence untouched. It destroyed my idea that Dharma lives in objects rather than in people. It forced me to discover what cannot be burned, the understanding that arises when teachings are not just studied, but embodied, not just preserved, but lived. The fire was a harsh teacher, but it taught something I might never have learned otherwise, that what can be destroyed was never the real thing anyway." This final story brings us to the deepest truth about healing from loss. Everything that can be taken from you is not your essential self. Your body can be damaged, but you are not your body. Your possessions can be destroyed, but you were never your possessions. Your relationships can end, but you are not defined by them. Your roles can be stripped away, but they were only forms your life was taking, not your life itself. What remains when everything removable is removed? This consciousness reading these words, this awareness experiencing this moment, this capacity to love, to understand, to be present, this essential you that has witnessed every change in your life and will witness every change still to come. This is what cannot be burned, cannot be broken, cannot be taken. When you experience catastrophic loss, when the fire comes through your life and burns everything, you have an opportunity. Not a pleasant opportunity, not one you would have chosen, but an opportunity nonetheless, to discover what remains, to find your essential self beneath all the forms and roles and identities you've worn, to understand yourself not as what you have or do or are called by others, but as the consciousness that experiences having, doing, being. Perhaps you've lost everything or feel you have. Perhaps illness took your health, death took your loves, circumstance took your security, time took your youth. Perhaps you're standing in the ashes of your life, feeling there's nothing left. This story whispers, you are what's left. The you that stands in the ashes, that experiences loss, that continues to be aware and present even in devastation. That you cannot be burned. That you is what you've been looking for all along beneath everything that could be taken. The healing is not rebuilding exactly what was lost. It's discovering what couldn't be lost. It's understanding yourself not as the library, but as the consciousness that used the library. Not as the body, but as the awareness inhabiting the body. Not as the roles you played, but as the player of roles who continues even when all roles are stripped away. In the darkest moment, when you've lost everything, you finally understand you are not the things that can be taken. You are what remains when everything else is gone. And that remaining self, that essential consciousness, that fundamental awareness, it's been here all along. It's what you actually are beneath every identity, every story, every form. The fire revealed it by burning away everything that wasn't it. Just this awareness, this presence, this consciousness that has never not been here, witnessing everything, surviving everything, continuing regardless of what forms come and go. Just this is who you truly are. Just this cannot be damaged or destroyed or taken. Just this remains always, whole and complete and enough. Just this is the healing, discovering what was never wounded because it cannot be wounded, what was never lost because it cannot be lost, what you have always been beneath every temporary form your life has taken. Rest now. Let go completely. The stories have done their work. You are held by the darkness, cradled by the silence, carried towards sleep by the gentle current of these words. Sleep brings its own healing. In dreams, your mind will process these teachings in ways beyond conscious understanding. You'll wake different, not because you've become someone else, but because you've remembered who you've always been. Someone capable of surviving, of healing, of transforming loss into wisdom. Tonight we've journeyed through stories of broken bowls made whole with gold, of loss revealing unexpected gifts, of bridges rebuilt stronger, of gardens that continue when we can no longer tend them. We've seen that healing is not returning to what was, but arriving fully in what is. We've learned that nothing essential can be lost because what's essential is not in things, but in us, in our capacity to love and understand and be present. As you drift into sleep, carry this understanding with you. You are healing right now. Not healing towards some future wholeness, but healing as the present fact of being alive, of breathing, of consciousness continuing regardless of what forms it takes. Your wounds are real. Your losses are real. Your pain is real. And so is your capacity to carry all of it forward into tomorrow, to continue despite breaking, to remake yourself when you cannot return to what you were. You are the potter with broken bowls, learning to make them beautiful with gold. You are the monk who gave everything, discovering that love transforms through sacrifice. You are the bridge that was rebuilt, stronger for having fallen. You are the garden that grows even when its gardener can no longer kneel in the soil. You are the healer whose wounds make healing possible. You are the musician who finds silence deeper than music. You are the village that rose from ashes with wisdom earned through fire. You are all these stories and more. You are the capacity to survive what seemed unsurvivable, to find meaning in what seemed meaningless, to become whole in a new way when the old wholeness shatters. You are healing itself, the process of life continuing, transforming, discovering what remains when what can be removed has been removed. If this brought you comfort, please like this video and subscribe to this channel. Many others are seeking exactly what you found here tonight. Sleep now without any burden. Everything is as it should be. You are exactly where you need to be. Rest deeply, dear friend. Wake peacefully. May healing continue its quiet work through the night, knitting together what was broken, not into what it was, but into what it's becoming. Something scarred and stronger, something honest and whole. Good night.